one of the words that I was really fascinated about is this word in Urdu that's known as fana.
But I have been to all 75 districts.
All 75,
77 now.
77
But
now. Are there
yeah.
any expressions in the Hungarian language which are really peculiar, which you wouldn't really get in other languages? Uh-huh.
But because of the amount of time that I have not been able to spend there, and there's less opportunity here,
Uh-huh.
and any Nepalis I speak with here mix like the film stars in Nepal. They mix English and Nepali, and so that's not very good for me.
So it was a joke that was widely distributed in Russia that whenever they went to space missions, the International Space Station, they would have a
Right?
mixture of Russian and English, and they'll call it Runglish or
Yeah,
Rusinglish.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
well, like Neplish.
yes, Neplish
This-
or Nepangrezi is what most people
oh,
have coined it.
Pangrezi. Oh, oh.
So,
Hare Krishna.
Hungary, तपाईँको मदर टङ चाहिँ हङ्गेरियन
Oh, oh, oh.
ए ओके
I was there. Saranasti. We were refugees in '56.
ओहो you were refugees in 56
I don't know. I listened to your talk about Russia, so you know a bit about Russia yourself. But
yes
you
yes
may remember that there was a revolution in okay.
yeah
So at that time we I have it written up in academic journal as well. Twice we were caught trying to escape, and the third time we succeeded. And anyway, it's a long story, but we ended up in Canada.
so so you guys Hungary should also have had its independence in around the 90s.
Yes, yes. Well, earlier than some of the other countries, and even while it wasn't, I was involved with our Olympic water polo team, and I took them to Hungary in 1975, and even back then, it was a lot more flexible system than in some of the other satellite countries. I remember taking our team on a bus, and the bus driver had Radio Free Europe on the radio. And I said, is this okay? You won't get into trouble? He says, no, as long as we don't bother anybody else, it's okay. So it's a lot more liberal. And it's quite a contrast to what is happening with the government now under Viktor Orban. It's a little bit embarrassing for me and a lot of other Hungarians. Just being buddy with Putin. But anyways.
Yeah, and
So, but I've been back a few times. I managed a project in Slovakia, and it was easier to get there via Budapest in Hungary and then go by train than to fly to Bratislava. And it was a longer trip. So I managed to visit my relatives 3-4 times. Yeah.
yeah, and how long has it been since you've been in Canada?
Well, we arrived in Canada in February '57.
February 57.
Yeah. So, but in between then, I studied for a year in Switzerland after high school. I went to college in Lausanne, and then many years in Nepal. I worked 3 years in Pakistan, in Peshawar. Yeah.
Quite a colorful
2008.
life.
Huh?
Quite a colorful life.
It is. I have no complaints in that regard. It's been. I feel very fortunate. Yeah.
And how was Pakistan like?
When I was called by the Canadian government to manage Canada's only development project there, and I talked to my wife about it, and at that time there were daily suicide bombings or other problems there. And she says, no, please don't. So I told them, I said, I'm sorry, we won't go. And then they called me again, and I said, we still won't go. And then I wrote a letter to anybody that I ever knew that I thought did or possibly did work in Pakistan. And without exception, they wrote back to me to say, you're crazy if you go. and because it's such a wild place. And then one Pakistani friend wrote back and said, Ivan, we're not animals here. There are good people. Please come. And then I got a call from Ottawa again, and I said, okay, we'll go. So that was 2008. And with that background, I have to tell you that I have absolutely zero regrets. It's a beautiful country, beautiful people, and like many other places, we see that around the world now, especially nowadays. There are some extremists that take advantage of people, of the situation, of maybe social problems that there might be. But I had a very, very, very good time there, and my wife enjoyed it as well. We even had our two daughters during their break from university in Canada. They came over and spent a couple of weeks with us there in Peshawar.
Wow.
All just properly dressed up. They loved it, and no, it was very good. And I'm still in touch with quite a few of my former colleagues and friends. So I recommend that to anybody to visit. It is a beautiful country.
Yes, I mean, a friend of mine who'd been to Pakistan told me that if they recognize that you're from outside Pakistan, maybe this doesn't apply to India, I don't really know, but if they get an inkling that you're from Nepal, they don't really charge you whenever you go to restaurants. And this has also been testified by a few Americans who've made travel vlogs about Pakistan. Whenever they're going to Pakistan, eating out in some restaurants, or they want to buy a dress, they say, okay, take it for free. We don't want this very negative image that Pakistan is a dangerous country or that people are really inhospitable to you. No, we're quite generous, and we can show for it.
Yes, that certainly could play a part in it. But I mean, we dealt with I had 50 local staff. I was the only foreigner in Peshawar, and they were Sunni Shia, one Christian lady, and my responsibility was Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is that province that Peshawar is the capital of, and it's right on the border with Afghanistan. So it was a very volatile environment, but we all got along very well, and I had no social related problems. I mean, I had experience from Nepal already and other countries that I worked in, and so that certainly helped me to how to deal with, how to react, how to behave, and so on. And I had very good support from the people. One interesting situation was that about 2 months into my stint there, and it was going quite well, I got a call from my boss in Canada saying that I have to come and meet you, and we need a serious talk about a certain problem that arose. I said, okay, it's up to you. So she flew over from Canada, and she arrived on I don't know, I forget, Friday or whatever. And on the weekend, I said, well, come, let's talk in my office. And she says, oh, no, it might be bugged. And I said, I don't think so, but where else would you suggest? How about the garden? She says, yes, let's walk in the garden. Hopefully they don't have mics in the garden. And so we're walking in the garden, and she said, and I said, well, what's going on? Why so? Why this type of interest? She says, well, I found out that you're Jewish, which I am, and we're afraid you're going to get killed here, and I want you to leave here within 2 weeks and return to Canada. And I was incensed, but I told myself to just hold it, calm down, and before replying. And I says, please give me a couple of hours to think about this. And I phoned her boss, higher level individual at the government, And I said, I really don't understand. It's not like I go advertising myself, but at the same time, I've had no problems. I have a very good relationship. And if you, in fact, do this, I'm going to go to the Human Rights Commission. It's going to cause a lot of problems. She says, okay, just relax and give me a couple of hours. And she called me back again in a couple of hours, and she says, your boss has been instructed not to talk to you about this anymore, and there's no problem.
Mm-hmm.
But in between this, I called my deputy, very nice fellow, Hamid, and I said, could you please come in urgently to the office because I have to discuss this with you. And that was the first time when I presented to him. I says, this is the problem that came up. The boss from Canada came. I'm asked to leave. This is the reason. I didn't find the need to tell you what religion I am or whatever, but now I'm telling you, and what do you think? And he said, Ivan, we're all descended from Abraham. We're with you. We like you. No problem. We'll support you in whatever way you want. And that made me really so comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It stayed that way for the rest of the 3 years. So I'm not saying that everybody's so understanding, but I found most of the people were and are, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the same in most countries, if not all.
Yeah.
You just have to find the right people and behave the right way with them and try to understand their perspective and why it might be different.
Mm-hmm. One of the reasons that I'm always fascinated with Pakistan is because the language Urdu is really beautiful.
Yeah.
The poetry in
Yes.
Urdu sometimes is unbeatable.
Yes.
I mean, I don't understand the languages of the Far East, for example, Chinese or Japanese. They say that Chinese is very airy sort of language. It isn't as rigid as the English. But if you listen to Urdu poetry, you get a sense of as if the language was made for poetry itself.
Yes. It is beautiful. So sometimes I even I unfortunately I was unable to learn that, and the major language in our area was Pashto, and it was just too much to learn two languages except for a few words. Rasha, Lasha, Lasha. That's when I'm backing up the car. But I found that there are obviously some historical overlaps with Nepali because of Sanskrit and Hindi and Urdu and so on. So sometimes when a person didn't understand maybe English so well, I tried Nepali. And quite often, they go, oh, yeah, that's what it means. Yeah, I get the gist of the meaning. But I agree with you, reading Urdu poetry in English, even in English, it's beautiful. Yeah, it's a lovely culture.
Yeah, I mean, one of the words that I was really fascinated about is this word in Urdu that's known as fana. And there was a movie that was made in the Hindi language, and it starred one of the big three Khans. Amir Khan was one of the actors, and Kajol was his counterpart. And I didn't really know what the word fana really mean. Until about a year ago, I thought I should check what the word means. And fana roughly translates in English as destroyed in love or destroyed by love. And I thought, wow, this is sentiment.
But Peshawar, I probably can't remember it right now, but there were three famous actors that originate from Peshawar, like Shah Rukh Khan, his family, and I forget the other. They're all Khans, but I've seen their houses
Okay.
or family.
Okay, that's wonderful. So when was this? About
2008 to 2011.
2008 to 2011. So do the people in Pakistan also talk about the partition or the vestiges of partition, how difficult it was during those times?
I don't think I ever engaged in a conversation about that. Like not purposely, but it just never came up. I was a few times in Lahore as well, which is of course right on the border or close to the border, and yeah, I mean even there it didn't come up. So I think if I brought it up, they'd have opinions, but it just never came up.
Ah.
There were too many other more pressing issues with the Taliban,
Mm-hmm.
and then religious Shia Sunni, unfortunately, so on. But by and large, the majority of people, like I said, cherish peace and getting along with people, and yeah, it's a beautiful culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when you came to Nepal, how difficult was it for you to learn the Nepalese language? I mean, did you have a background in Sanskrit?
No, I didn't have any, but I had a background in languages because well, my mother tongue was Hungarian. Then when the Russians came, I picked up some Russian words, kicking a soccer ball around with the soldiers, which I didn't know they were bad. um, but then we settled in Montreal,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a bilingual city, so I was learning both English and French in school.
Mm-hmm.
So I had an affinity for languages, and then much later on, like I briefly said in the beginning, between 75, 76, I was involved with the Olympic. I was in the Olympic team here
Mm-hmm.
for water polo, and by the end of the Olympics, I got almost like ulcers from the politics of the Olympics, and a very good friend of mine was a missionary in Nepal.
Mm-hmm.
Old university friend of mine, he became a missionary, and he was in Pokhara. And he says, well, "Why don't you come here, help out at the school? It was a mission school, Adarsha Madhyamik Vidyalaya, Pokhara,
Mm-hmm.
and stay a few months, and you could help us with English, physical education, well, whatever." And I did that. That was my introduction, and so upon arrival in Kathmandu, I went directly out the next morning to Pokhara, and I spent 3 months uh, working voluntarily at the school, and I got very interested in the Nepali language. I started to really appreciate the culture for whatever reason, but it was appealing. And when I left, came back to Canada, I had to work. um, I brought a grammar book back home with me and started studying it. And then in 19, was it in 82? I went back in 1980. I had a scholarship, Shri Panch Mahendra Chakrabarti.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a scholarship at the TU. I was working with Dr. Hitnarayan Jha, famous, you probably know him. And so I started a daily conversation with a local Nepali friend, 1 hour in Nepali and 1 hour English, so help both sides. And then I also was taking classes. At home, a teacher came to my house and we could only do that for about 2 months because I was very pathetic. I literally went across the country. In fact, I was the first Nepali I was told by the ministry to get a permit for every place in Nepal.
Uh-huh.
While I had this scholarship, which was 2 years. So from 80 to 82, I traveled the country. And I had to sink or swim. So like I had to, practice. And of course, even the language is a bit different from ethnic group to ethnic group and so on. But, and then 83 to 85, I worked in Northern Canada with the government. And my drives visiting many communities were very long. Like I had to drive sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours to reach particular communities. And I had a cassette of Nepali language, and that was the only thing I listened to, going, coming. I still sing some of the songs from that. And then from 88 till now, till recently, I had part and full-time consulting, managing, evaluating work with the different ministries. So, and even now, I do try to learn and speak, but I feel I'm losing. I know the feeling, because I at one point I could easily say I speak, and I speak, read, and write, not fluently, of course, but that I used to be better in the Pali than my mother tongue.
Mm-hmm.
Now I feel it's slipping somewhat, but maybe it'll come back.
Mm-hmm.
I've just been busy with too many other non-Nepali related writing, whatever.
Right. Is the language from Hungary also Germanic, or what roots
Oh,
does
no,
it?
it's Finno-Ugric.
Mm-hmm.
So the closest relatives to it are Finnish and Estonian,
Ah, okay.
but they're mutually unintelligible. I have a very close Finnish friend here, and we tried once to say, let's speak. You speak Finnish, I'll speak Hungarian, and see if we understand each other. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, if I remember, I said something like, "Van neked tej?" Do you have milk in Hungarian? And he said, well, tej in Finnish means flea. So no, I don't have fleas, that type of thing. But if you listen to someone speaking Finnish, the sort of the cadence, the lilt of the language seems Hungarian if you don't hear the actual words.
Uh-huh.
But in fact, about a fifth of the Hungarian and Finnish overlap, about a fifth of the vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
But the words are so some are derivative. They're not exact. You don't hear it exactly the same way, so you may not recognize it. Same thing with Mongolian. There are about 2,000 words that are in common with Hungarian
Mm-hmm.
in Mongolia, because the Mongolian hordes settled on the plains of Hungary. That was their last sort of conquest, and then so there's still 2,000 words that overlap. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So after Hungary, it was the turn of the English language?
After Hungary, it was English and French simultaneously.
English and French simultaneously.
And,
And you were how many years old back then?
10.
10.
Yeah,
Okay. And
it's a good age to learn languages.
good age. Yeah, a bit of spare time as well. And given that there was not a lot of gadgets to disturb you, it must
Oh
have
no,
been.
no cell phones,
Uh-huh.
no computers, no. A lot of reading and writing, and I
Yeah.
did a lot of reading. I still do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, I'm on the computer a lot. I have to, but I still have a. I don't know if you can see it, but I have a very large
Library.
library. I have about over 1,000 books on Nepal,
Mm-hmm.
in Nepali and English, and in fact, I've been trying to. Trying to downsize, and I want to keep the books, but I can't keep them forever, and I'm willing to donate to. I have not been able to find any university or whatever that wants them. Yeah. Anyways, that's a
Mm-hmm.
future thing.
Okay. So, English and French. Can you draw out a lot of parallels between English and French? I mean, there are a lot of English and French have a common ancestry. Some French even say that English came out of French. Some Germans
Yeah,
say that. Some
they
Germans
would
say
do
that.
that.
Yeah.
Yes, they would say that. Yeah. there are overlaps, obviously. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
both of them, and I mean, Latin is sort of a base for all the Romance languages:
Mm-hmm.
French, Spanish, Italian, Romansh, and so on. and there's a lot of Latin words in in English. And I, in fact, took Latin for 4 years in school. I was in my last year of Latin was the very last Latin class that was held because nobody on earth wanted more Latin, and I was the only student in the very last class in the school I went to. But I used to joke that people ask me, why are you taking Latin? And I said, well, maybe I can apply to be Pope one day. But that obviously wouldn't have come true. But there are a lot of English root words in, a lot of Latin root words in English as well. So quite often, if I'm not sure of the meaning of something, if I remember my Latin root, I sort of get the gist of it. And that's where Sanskrit is very useful for Nepali as well. If people study Sanskrit, it would be probably easier to better understand all the Sanskritic languages. I mean, Bengali, Hindi, Nepali, Gujarati, and so on.
So do you have a good sense of Hindi as well?
Well, Kurbani, all these Hindi films. I obviously can understand some, but there too I've weakened since my Nepali has weakened. By less use, I'm losing some of the Hindi as well. But when in India, I was able to, again, combination of Nepali, Hindi, English, no problem. And especially, it also depends on whether my interlocutors are speaking quickly or slowly, and so on. Sometimes I understand Hindi more than the movie stars being interviewed in Neplish and by Damala or someone else.
So how many languages would you say you're fluent at?
Well, I'd like to say Hungarian, English, French, and Nepali. And I can get along in some of the other ones. Like because of Latin, I can read Spanish, Italian, and I can make out the words, but I can't speak them or write them just like that. I've studied German. I've studied Russian as well, but again, these are in the past. I studied Russian. When I did study Russian, it was mainly to learn how to read Cyrillic. And German. Yeah, German was a required language in one of my programs. So, but again, that's in the past. But I'm sure there's some kind of residual effect. At least if I hear a Russian word, I can pronounce it reasonably well, and the same with the German, and I can make out a lot of German words even though I've forgotten vocabulary. Yeah.
Okay, well, since you know 4 languages, I mean, you're fluent at 4 languages, you know more than 4. Reasonably. Is there a particular trick to have while learning languages? I mean, is there something that a language learner should do in order to get the other language very quickly?
Yeah, the only there isn't any trick, but to learn languages, first of all, the earlier the better. Children, in elementary school can easily deal with 2 to 3 languages at the same time. If you think about it, even in Nepal, how many families now send their kids to English school, but at home they speak Nepali or Newari or whatever. It's the same everywhere. So that's one thing. Don't be afraid of starting to learn a new language when you are young, or the parents to encourage the kids or put them into proper programs. One thing that I have an aunt a linguist aunt back in Hungary who told me once, because sometimes we can't think of a word in the language we're speaking in. So, if I can't think of something in Nepali, I say it in English, that type of thing. And she said, don't do that. Try to always talk around the word, try to describe what you want to say in the words that you do know in that language, rather than taking the easy way and
hopping around languages.
yeah, just saying it in English or whatever. And I believe in that. I've tried that many times. So that's one thing that I would recommend. But it's also never too late to learn a new language. And it also, even in your, I mean, I learned Nepali in my 30s, so, and early 30s, but I used to say when I was learning it, somebody asked me, how old were you? And I said, tintis. I didn't know tetis. I mixed it up. Tintis. I was learning like that. But no, it's never too late. But it also depends on whether the language you wish to learn has a relationship to any other language that you might already know.
Such as the English and the
speak
French.
to go into French or Italian, Romansh, Romanian is easier than a totally different language. I mean, it happens with the languages that I'm involved with. There's no relationship amongst them at all. Hungarian, Nepali, French, and whatever. Very little relationship, anyways. So yeah, and then it also depends on the type of pronunciation, the type of alphabet that's used, and so on. I've been many times. I've had work in Mongolia, probably 10, 12 times visits. And although there are some, well, like I said, about 2,000 words that are common with Hungarian, for example, I tried using some, but the pronunciation there is very difficult. I still don't have it. It's a very difficult language for me. I think. So, but yeah, languages that are somehow connected linguistically are much easier to learn. And if you start early, again, I'm repeating my advice, but the earlier you start, the better, because the brain can handle it. And especially if you can, join some groups, community groups of that particular language, or and here in Canada, for example, for French in most provinces, even the ones that aren't French, which are almost all of them, there are French schools. So, even in my small city, we only have 100,000 people, but we have 2 French schools. So you can send your kid to that school. So there are ways of getting the youth involved in language.
Yeah, I mean, one of the more striking things about the way you talk in the Nepalese language is that you've almost nailed the pronunciation.
Yeah.
So how can somebody be so good at pronouncing Nepalese words in the Nepalese way?
Of course, it's a reality. Both vocabulary and accents maybe influence what other languages one speaks, the frequency, the extent of being able to use that particular language, as well as whether anyone ever corrects you or not. Sometimes you're not corrected, you think you nailed it, and even in Nepali, I mean, a Bon can notice a Newar, language, and then even in Newar, there are differences between Bhaktapur and Nepali, and so on and so forth, both vocabulary, pronunciation, and so on. So, yeah, I don't know what more I can say on accents, but I remember. And this is going to be a different question, different topic. um, where I was introduced at a club by a member of the club in Kathmandu. I was invited by a member of a large social club in Kathmandu. It was mainly doctors, business people, and so on, to give a short talk. And the chair of the group was going to introduce me. He didn't know anything about me, but the member who invited me did, and they said he'll talk about this, talk about that, whatever. And so the chair was introducing me, and he said, "Maile hamra paunako paricha dinuagi, tito vishayaharu afe marako." Mito kuraharu matra chalfagaron. And to which I responded after being introduced in English, Kune samasha China satiharu. Yatamito watito kuraharu chalfagaron sakun. And there was much laughter and so on. But it reminded me, knowing another language is very useful for monitoring of sort of checking on what others are doing with your translation. For example, if you know the language, you know what I mean. Like it reduces the need for interpreters. But if you are using interpreters, either because you have to or you need to, and you're good enough at the language, you can sort of check
if the nuances are properly conveyed or not.
Yeah, and this has also happened to me in another instance. Like I've evaluated about 15 or more projects in Nepal, and some I did solo, and I had I was given permission to not announce where I was going, when I was going, and so the group running the project would not know that I'm coming to evaluate. And this was on my request because I had been familiar with a lot of sort of royal camps where everything all of a sudden on arrival was just perfect. Everybody was happy and everything was going well. And I had a feeling that in many cases of evaluation, things are prepared in advance like that. And in a couple of those places where I did go and I did listen to sort of private conversations, I found that it was not quite what they had officially told us or told somebody else. So anyway, so knowing the language is useful in in that regard as well.
Yeah, they often say that French is a really romantic language. Do you think that it's more romantic than Nepalese or English for that matter?
Oh, bien sûr, of course. I think it's partly the real the sound, the cadence. It's a euphonic language with it sort of sounds romantic, like other Romance languages. But I have to admit that when you listen to Yeti Choko, Yeti Mito, another Narigan Gopal songs and so on, it's a pretty tough competition with French in that regard. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I always wanted to learn French in order to compare it with Urdu in some ways and see because as a Nepalese, as someone who's only trained in the English language, I don't think that English is as musical as Urdu, and I don't think even Nepalese has that musicality as good as Urdu. And I really wanted to compare French and Urdu and see if both of them were with par on one another, or if one could tip the other one over.
Well, you start now while you're still young. Start now. You can do it. I have a feeling that every language, speakers of every language would say that theirs is the most beautiful, romantic language. But having heard many languages and speaking, being conversant in a few, I would say that it's a toss up between Nepali and French. I would go with that.
Okay. When we try to translate a few common phrases such as "I love you" in the Nepalese language, it becomes "Mati milai maya garchu," and that sounds really authentic to us compared to "I love you." "I love you" sounds very boring. Anybody in the street could say that, but to say "Mati milai maya garchu," yeah, timi meri,
But the other,
yeah,
go ahead.
for us Nepalese, I think that would also mean that we value our language more. But this is more pronounced when you take the other example. Say, for example, "I hate you" would be translated into "Ma timilai घृणा गर्छु." And it sort of is not simply hating, but you have extreme revulsion for the other person whenever you're talking about घृणा, because we also have this word घिन लाग्नु, which means that you're very disgusted by the other person. So sometimes I tend to think that Nepalese can give you a bit of gravity, which using English too much really doesn't.
It's interesting because in English, love, like nowadays, if you are at a party, you're meeting friends, you're on the phone, whatever, like 90% of the people would say, "Oh, I love you, I love you." Like literally, they say, "Oh, I love you," to friends, to
anybody at all.
it's lost its meaning in that sense. It's really lost its meaning. So yeah, I agree with you.
And are there any expressions in the Hungarian language which are really peculiar, which you wouldn't really get in other languages?
Yes, there are, and I don't know if I can come up with them now, but Hungarian is good because it's got how can I say it? Probably it's one is phonetic like Nepali, so in that sense it's easy. It's actually not that difficult to learn because it is phonetic, unlike English. And it's the most capable of interminable word combinations. You can combine words to make them one word in many ways. But the thing that Hungarian is probably most famous for foreigners is its level of profanity. It's got the most exquisite profane words, which I don't use. There's even a dictionary of Hungarian profanity. It's supposed to be the absolute, the fount of profound expressions.
Yeah, well, I was looking at untranslatable words from other languages, and in Hungarian, I think there's this word "tuti muti." I don't know what this is. It means that a weak-willed person who fears every action. So, is there a word like that in Hungarian as well? I don't know.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. Yeah.
And I was once talking to somebody from Denmark, and they said that there was this feeling of hygge. Hygge refers to a general sense of coziness, and they were really proud of that word and said that we've got the Danish hygge with us. And as long as that is there, it carries the essence of our language.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I've heard about that too. I just remembered something you were asking. Were we asking about accents? We were talking about accents.
Yes, we were talking about accents.
I remember I did a lot of work with my university colleagues in Jamaica. And Jamaica in the Caribbean has its own patois, its own sort of dialect. And one of our team members was of Czech origin, from Czechoslovakia at that time. And so he spoke with a very heavy accent. And the Jamaicans found it easier to understand him with this crazy accent than the rest of us with no accent. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how was your stay in Nepal? Since you've traveled so many districts, and you said that you're one of the first, maybe the first person to have gone to so many districts in that country.
I know. Tony Hagen was the first.
Okay.
But yeah, but I have been to all 75 districts.
All 75,
77.
77 now. So
Yeah.
this would have been at a time when the road infrastructure was not very good compared to now.
That's my mild way of saying it. Yes, no road, which I loved. I mean, I didn't care about it, but obviously there are benefits of it. But yeah, so this was between well, 76, some of it between 80 and 82. And then later on, even when I lived 5 years out in Surkat, and from there also I went hither and thither. So yeah. Where were we with that?
So did you?
Yeah, I was all over.
You're all over. And have you been to Nepal recently? Any time?
Last year we were there for a month, and we're hoping to come again sometime this year.
Okay. So
For the tourists.
you must have been to the great trekking destinations of our country, such as Everest.
I have.
Annapurna.
I have, and in fact, I've led treks and climbs also in my spare time. So yeah, yeah, I was a mountaineer. I picked up mountaineering in Switzerland when I studied there, and then back in Canada, I moved out to Western Canada, the Rocky Mountains here, and continued mountaineering in my spare time. So I've done quite a bit of that. But I love the. In fact, I would rather travel by bus or walk, at least back then, than fly. Not because of the danger of plane accident, but because of weather and cancellations and so on. On buses, I always made sure if there was room that I traveled on the very top of on the roof, so that if it was about to go over a cliff, I could jump off onto the roadside. But I loved walking around because it allowed me to, and this carried over into my times with evaluations. It allowed me to talk to people on the way, chat, find out, specific to many of the evaluations I did. I would ask people, informally, were they familiar with this particular project? What was good, bad, whatever. So I pick up stuff in Chiapasal and so on, and then I really enjoyed that. I visited many beautiful places. It's a beautiful country, absolutely. Still love it, miss it. And I don't know whether the roads. I was just corresponding with somebody that wrote a paper on the disadvantage of roads. Maybe you've seen it. I don't know. An Italian professor. And there certainly are disadvantages of roads in some areas. I mean, I noticed myself when I was working in Surkat for 5 years. The road was being built then up towards Jumla and so on. And there was increase in prostitution, complaints by people, their agricultural lands were being destroyed. And there's a lot of health concerns. So there are disadvantages like that. Yeah, I walked once from Mahendranagar up to right up to Bajang, Bajura, Jumla, Humla.
My goodness.
It's beautiful.
And how much time did it take from Mahendranagar inching upwards to the north?
I have it all detailed in my diary, but can I remember? I think probably 2 to 3 weeks.
2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and time can vary. It depends whether one, what one does in a particular area, how tired one is. Sometimes you have to plan, if at all possible, to plan distances based on where you can actually stay at night.
Mm-hmm.
And there were places where I had to ask to stay with private houses, like there weren't any lodges or tea houses or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
There was one place I remember where I had difficulty in all my travels in Nepal, and that was, if I remember, Taksar. It's east of Kathmandu.
Okay.
I found, but I couldn't find anybody to. There was no inn, no tea house, nobody wanted a guest for the night. And finally, I found one guy that said, "Oh, I study management, whatever, and yeah, come stay with me." So, but usually I had no problem. Certainly in the remote villages, very easy to find places to stay and chat with the people and learn about them, and they were interested in me. It was a wonderful learning experience.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sort of fascinated now that since you were in Nepal back in the 80s, how was Kathmandu like back then?
Um, very different from now in a way. You could already see that if it were going to continue this way, it would become terrible. I mean, talking about the environment, the traffic, all the housing, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But even back then, there was considerable pollution. I remember I stayed for 2 years. I lived in Bagbazar.
Mm-hmm. Bagbazar.
Uh, Somebody always took our garbage,
Mm-hmm.
or my, and it took a few weeks or months, maybe even, when I decided to see where he took it, because I never saw garbage trucks. They to go out, register with me. What exactly to do with this? And there's that. What is it called? I think it's Tukchikola. I forget.
Tukuchekola.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where they took it and dumped it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of garbage is still dumped that way, even now. So you could see the sort of increase of problems unless something was done to mitigate what happens with the garbage. Traffic was not too bad, but very unruly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many car doors I kicked when they came too close to my flying pigeon bicycle, which I had to ride every day.
Mm-hmm.
There's no respect for pedestrians or cyclists.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then the housing, it seemed better at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly at that time, for example, they were just starting to build the Patton Hospital, and there was nothing around Patton Hospital. It was fields, and construction was starting, so you could see some buildings coming up, some stores taking advantage of the construction, and so on. But compared to what it is now, I mean, it was a quiet rural area in a way. I find it kind of sad the way it's developed, because it didn't need to develop this way had there been governments that could govern properly. And I don't think that has happened, unfortunately. Well-meaning people, but not to be able to control sanitation and traffic and water supply. And I mean, how long? I think Melamshi still isn't running properly.
Yes, it isn't. It isn't.
I know when it was, what, it was 20 years ago, whenever it was planned, or even more years ago
Yeah,
than
more years
that.
ago than that. Uh-huh.
And in that sense, I've always found rural Nepal better because in most places that I went to, there was clean water available.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the no traffic, no noise like that. So that appeals to me more. Obviously, to a lot of people, urbanity appeals more, and there are wonderful features of Kathmandu, and I love Kathmandu and Patan especially. But for the future, if the government, this is my own opinion, of course, but if there's no literal decentralization, like moving particular departments outside of the city, it will just keep getting bigger and bigger, and there'll be less and less land available for farming or recreation or whatever in Kathmandu Valley,
Mm-hmm.
because there's no limits on what can be built right now, so it seems. And you know, a lot of disasters that happened there, and we have disasters here too, but there are no enforced regulations for where to build, how to build, and if there are, you can get away with it still, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I still love the place because one, I have many very close friends there, and family there, and it's a beautiful historical religious place. The culture is continues to impress, and so on. But at the same time, I think, like many Nepalis feel as well, I think the increase in traffic and pollution, and then very little is being done about it. I know Balan is doing things in Kathmandu. People like it, some don't. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know how much you want to get into politics. So I don't know. Going back to your question, I mean, back then, yeah, just somewhat quieter, but you could see that if it were to increase, which it has, it would not be quite as pleasant as it was back then, 1976 especially, and then 1980, 82, and the mid 80s. It was starting to hurt the population and the people. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, last time I was talking to another Canadian. This was Shirley Blair, and I think she runs a school
Oh yeah,
for,
school.
yes,
Yes.
in Himalayan children. And I asked her about the changing demographics of our country, that more and more people are flocking out, and we only have the older generation people here, or very small children. We don't really have working population
Yeah.
here. And what do you make of it? And she told me that she knew about this 20 or 30 years ago, that
Mm.
there was an anthropologist working
Yeah.
on Gorkha, and the anthropologist pointed to her out that villages are becoming empty. Only the
Mm.
ones who are really old are staying. The working population is practically devoid. And she thought that this would be a projection of our country in the future as well. So
Yes.
even you knew that Kathmandu would go down this route of pollution and
Yeah.
environmental desecration in some ways.
Yeah.
And it's pity
But
that we can't do
and
anything about it.
only because I couldn't see regulations
Mm-hmm.
or enforcement of regulations.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I knew people that had restaurants that when the tax officer came, you know, they would pay. I don't remember the numbers, but they would pay 5,000 rupees, so they don't get a tax bill of 20,000 rupees. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
This type of thing.
And
I
yeah,
just couldn't see a progress in
yeah.
that sense.
One of the bigger problems that I see whenever somebody from outside of Nepal comes to our country is that
Yeah,
as soon as they land in the airport, people, the taxi drivers, are heckling these people and
yeah,
wanting to shove and push them so that they could get in their cabs, and that they could elicit some money out of it, which would be
yeah,
exorbitant
yeah,
compared to the taxi fares normally. Did you
yeah,
also go
yeah.
through something like this? Sometimes.
No, because I'm always picked up by family or friends, so
Uh,
I don't have to worry about that.
yeah.
But I see it. I mean, I see it with others.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, the airport is a microcosm of some of the issues where they have difficulty having regulations to keep taxi drivers and others that have nothing to do inside
Mm-hmm.
away from the front door. They're
Mm-hmm.
trying every year to do something, but it's still not institutionalized enough.
Yeah. And and since you were in a country when the villages were not really touched by this
Yeah,
wave
yeah,
of urbanization, and
yeah.
there were no modern buildings or no driving of roads into those places, do do the days of the past still feel a bit nostalgic, wishing that the villages had essentially been the same and not been urbanized in some ways?
Yeah, nostalgia is a difficult word. For me, I could easily say yeah, yes, it is nostalgic for me. But I do know that in many of the villages I visited, life was very hard,
Mm-hmm.
and if they wish to have certain improvements, I think it's within their right to at least try to get them
Mm-hmm.
if they can't. But to try to get them, it's not for me or any other outsider to say, "Well, no, because you'll spoil this this beauty."
Uh-huh.
But I remember, to juxtapose that, I walked into, I spent 3 months in Mustang
Mm-hmm.
back in 80 or 80, 81. And we had to walk in, of course. Um, and at that time, I saw the first sort of crazy Westerner trying to go up by bicycle. It's mountain bikes. Eh?
Uh-huh.
Um, I happened to know the guy just by coincidence. He came from the same city I was in Canada, and he he told me that he thought it was a great sort of publicity thing, but he had to carry his bike more than ride it.
Uh-huh.
Narrow trails and so on and so forth. Um, but now, as you know, up in Jomsom and Mustang, you have five-star hotels and so on. It's very, very different from. I mean, when I went there the first time, my, my friend that I stayed with, local Takali, his father had an apple orchard,
Mm-hmm.
and he said when the government wanted uh, to have apples grown there because it was found that the soil was appropriate and so on and so forth, and nobody wanted to do it
Mm-hmm.
because, as I think still happens in some parts of Nepal, somebody's trying to convince you to grow something else. You could grow this thing, but you
Mm-hmm.
don't want to grow that because what if it doesn't work out? Nobody's going to
Mm-hmm.
compensate you,
Mm-hmm.
and the government was going to fine them if they don't start orchards. And my friend's father started an orchard, and it was so successful that others then picked it up. So if sometimes you need somebody to take a risk and show other people that if you do this particular change, it can help change your life.
Mm-hmm.
That was around the same time that another friend of mine, Pasang Sherpa, was he initiated the Marfa horticulture farm,
Mm-hmm.
and he was an interesting guy. I mean, he's was talking about learning languages. I mean, he's a Sherpa. He spoke Sherpa and Nepali, of course, English, and he studied in France, where he got his horticulture and viniculture accreditations. And so I was able to visit him every week or so and have some wine together and speak French up in Jomsom.
Uh-huh.
Uh, yeah. So of course, one has nostalgia for the old days, but just be whoever has this nostalgia. Respect the people that you're nostalgic about, if it's about the people and their particular circumstance, and respect their decision if they say they would like a road, or they do need a health center, or do need an improvement in the school, and so on.
So
There are detriments to roads for sure.
yeah. Now I wonder if you have the nostalgia for the good old Marfa as well.
Oh, I do. But for the old one, yes.
Yeah, for the old one.
I mean, I can't think. I know lots of people that have now driven. You could drive up there, and I don't know. Again, nostalgia tells me no. I probably would not like that. Again, it's not up to me. It's up to those people, and best is to survey people who have these new infrastructures, and see what they say. I know there are many places where there are roads. In this article I told you about, I can find it and send it to you if you're interested. It talked about the fewer air flights, for example, because people now drive in, and there's a change in the type of hotels. Because of the road, people want the people that drive on the road want a higher standard hotel, not this Chiapasal type, and so the people that had poor accommodations, they're out of business. People are building bigger hotels and so on. So you've got these repercussions all the time. But this is in all countries, not only Nepal. There's perhaps more of an effect in Nepal on a bigger type of change that's between highly rural area and it becomes somewhat semi-urbanized. That's a bigger change than what might happen in a neighborhood in Canada or any other country. Yeah.
Yeah, you were talking about Nepali chia as well. Do you drink tea that way over in Canada?
Sometimes we do, yes. Sometimes, not always. I love coffee, and most of the time I drink coffee. But yeah, we drink tea as well. Sometimes Nepali style, sometimes
Tibetan?
other style. yeah.
Okay.
I like it. I mean, part of what makes it somewhat more interesting for me is I've worked in so many countries, including Tibet, and I love the experiences in the different countries. So that perhaps makes me a bit more flexible in accepting strange foods or whatever.
Yeah.
But I do have my preferences.
Yeah. I mean, and what about the preferences in food?
Absolutely eclectic and international. I mean, yeah, I can say I love dal bhat tarkari, I love momo, whatever, shekwa, and so on, but choila. But I also like Hungarian paprika shirka, and I love Indonesian food and Mongolian food, and even North Korea, cold noodles, and that was good.
In North Korea?
Yeah.
And this was in...
That was in the when I was working at university. I went to well, this is interesting. I've always been interested in North Korea, but then no reason to go there. And when I was working at university, and on a visit to Nepal during that time, this is a shorter visit. One of my friends said he could introduce me to the North Korean ambassador. And I said, sure, I'd love that. And did, and chatted with him. And I said, and at that time, the Canadian government was willing to make some project collaboration, unlike the Americans, but we had diplomatic relationship, and wanted to make some kind of collaboration. So they told me that if I could find some arrangement there, they could help. And and I told the ambassador that if I could do something through my university, would that be possible? He says, no problem, I'll arrange it. And I came back home and we corresponded, and I got an invitation. And the invitation said that you fly to Beijing, you stay in such and such a hotel, go pick up your visa at our embassy, and then they'll fly you to Pyongyang. And I was thinking, yes or no, like, university's paying for this. Will I arrive in Beijing and then these people say no? And anyways, a couple of people contacted me and said, no problem, don't worry about it, trust us. I've never had a visa faster than this. I arrived there. I went to the hotel. If I remember, it was a Swiss hotel. Went to the embassy. Within 5 minutes, I had my visa. The next day, flew to Pyongyang, and I spent a week there with government officials, 2 universities, National Library, some other organizations, trying to coordinate some type of joint project.
Interesting. I mean, when I read articles about North Korea that are written by Westerners, there was one journalist, Christopher Hitchens, who said that when he traveled to North Korea, and he said that he was one of the very few people who had been to the 3 axis of evil countries in the world: Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. And he said that North Koreans would be scrounging for grains that have fallen in the streets as well, because the amount of poverty or the amount of hunger was that exorbitant. So did you also get a chance to explore the cultural side of things, or was it purely...
I tried, but it was limited. I was able to, like, because of my schedule there, every morning and then later in the evening after dinner, I went for walks. And they says, yeah, no problem, go for walks. And I don't think I was ever followed. I walked around. The stores were like a department store with huge window, so you could see everything inside, and there was hardly anything inside. It was pretty sparse in that sense. I didn't see anybody picking, food off the floor, and very few people would smile or even look at you. I think because a foreigner, I think the only person that smiled at me was a female traffic police man, and otherwise it was pretty somber. But the people I dealt with directly, both from the government and university, library, technical institutions, were very knowledgeable. I mean, they were, not all of them, but at least 4 of them were bilingual or trilingual, and some had worked overseas. And so obviously they were elite. But every evening we had some drinks together, and tongues loosened, and hearts opened, and I got the feeling that they knew there was a better way, especially ones that had been overseas. But if anybody opens his mouth or her mouth, not only that person, but the person's family would be, locked up for good.
Okay.
So we have to be very careful. But I found them, very intelligent. In fact, one of the university people gave me a CD of a 3-dimensional architectural program that they had. And I shared it at home with an architecture friend of mine, and he says he hasn't seen anything like that here. It's fantastic. They have very good technical capabilities. And we did go in the countryside, but I mean, it was a short time, and obviously they didn't take me to anywhere where I could see people being very, very, very poor. So in that sense, it was it was programmed. So I can't speak to that, but I
Mm-hmm.
could see that people were very somber, and I could sense the poverty because of the lack of anything in the windows, and tourist stuff being set up. If there's anybody at the hotel, they set up an instant daily counter outside the hotel door.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In all of your travels, is there a country that you wished you had the chance to go to and have not had the chance to do so?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I'd love to go to, Iran, Iraq, for example,
Mm-hmm.
the culture there, religion, and so on. I'd love to go to Israel. That's out of the question now. um, I've been to South America, Caribbean. I mean, I've been on every continent except Antarctica. But I, everywhere there's some beauty and interest, history. So it's hard to single out any others. I mean, when I say Iran, Iraq, because they've been in the news so much, I've been to Libya twice as well before, before it was turned over into what it is now. Um, I can't offhand I can't think of any that stick out in my mind because
Mm-hmm.
I'd be pleased to go to any new country, almost any new country. I think.
Yeah. Well, um, and what do you make of the current war that's happening in Israel and Palestine? I mean, uh, there is this idea of a Jewish homeland as well in Israel, but I mean, I don't really want to get into the politics because there's
Yeah,
a great amount of history
yeah, yeah.
and
No, and I've
whatnot.
written about this. I can send it to you separately. You could read that
Yeah, sure.
because I'm a group, discussing that quite vehemently.
Mm-hmm.
Um, First of all, I would not conflate um, Jews with the government
Zionists,
of Israel,
Israel.
or
Okay.
Zionists. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because if you read the news, there are a lot of Israelis that are against what is happening now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there are.
One thing I find a little bit strange is it was started by Hamas with
Mm-hmm.
October 7th. There aren't any demonstrations against that now because what Israel has done has been exceptionally retaliatory. So that's one thing. There are also other not I don't want to dismiss this. I will come back to it, but there are so many other places where there are thousands and thousands being killed. We can talk about Sudan, South Sudan,
Mm-hmm.
Ethiopia, Eritrea, Myanmar, how many hundreds of thousands of Rohingya expelled, and so on. And I don't see demonstrations about those at all. So in that sense, a lot of Israelis and Jews, even though there's a difference between Judaism and Zionism,
Mm-hmm.
Israel, the government, it seems, well, how come this is the only thing that people seem to be concerned about? Um, but bottom line is, yeah, I don't like, many don't like how it has progressed, and a lot of the fault, I think, will end up being shown to have been with the government of Israel, the intelligence services,
Mm-hmm.
which have, I mean, if they know when a particular leader of Hamas is in a meeting in a particular house in Lebanon and can strike him, not to have known that this would happen is unbelievable. And in fact, it has been shown that they were already warned weeks ahead of time that
Mm-hmm.
this was coming.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one aspect as well. But it's very uncomfortable because a lot of people do conflate the two. They don't realize that certainly not everybody agrees with that.
Mm-hmm.
And there are there are historical antecedents that have influenced Hamas. Not that what they did is correct, but it's not. It's horrible. But there is a long history in that whole area of governance that could not cope with the different religions and ethnicities.
Hmm. Do you think that we'll have a two-state solution to this?
I don't think, and I've written about this too. I don't think a two-state solution is workable at all.
Mm-hmm.
First thing that comes to mind in a two-state solution is East and West Pakistan,
Mm-hmm.
in between. If you have the West Bank and Gaza, even if you have the same party, even if you have just Fatah running both of them, or something like that, same government,
Mm-hmm.
Israel will, unless there's some geographical change, will be in between, and it affects transport, communication, resources like water, electricity, and so on. I just can't see how a country can continue to exist like that. And like East Pakistan, it can become Bangladesh. So I for that reason, I can't see it. The other thing is that when a country is split, such as Taiwan from mainland China,
Mm-hmm.
and many other places like that, um, Hong Kong from China,
Mm-hmm.
the culture of those two places, if they have been apart for a long time, um, that tends to become very different, and not compatible anymore with the government systems, unless taken by force. And if you do it by force, then what happens, like in Yugoslavia, you can keep it together harmoniously for some years, and then when there's an opportunity to split, it splits.
Mm-hmm.
and and even now, those tensions from the amalgamation times many years back are still are causing problems now in Kosovo and Serbia and so on. So yeah, you can force them together, but then sooner or later it will break apart.
Mm-hmm.
At least this shows that.
One
And
thing. Come on.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Tell me.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I'm afraid of a truly of a regional conflagration if this continues in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
That's evident now with Hezbollah trying to get involved, maybe Iran obviously backing them,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and the Israeli government being very right wing. And it has got two people in there, at least two ministers that just should not be there.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, it's outlined in my paper. I'll send you.
Yeah, sure. Uh, if I may touch upon, and if this is not intrusive, since you're Jewish, I'm fascinated as to uh, your parents and your grandparents, or do you have stories about
Yes.
what was the time like when they were around the World War period, the whole
Yeah.
persecution?
Yeah. My grandparents on my mother's side, they hid in garbage containers and were able to somehow make their way out of the country into Austria.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, my father's, they were in a different city. My father's parents, his two brothers, and their wives were all shipped out by the Nazis and never to be heard from again. I'm still trying to find some information about them. The only thing I could find positively so far is, or confirmed, is that they were shipped out. So there was no family left in that regard. And because of that background, um, I remember, you had to be careful who knew that you were Jewish. And
Jewish.
at Christmas time, we put a small Christmas tree in the window so people would think we're
Mm-hmm.
Christians. Um, but I must say that even there was a little bit of light, because my father he was working at he was a textile engineer, and he was working at one of the largest such companies. And the Nazis wanted to take him to, like anybody that was Jewish, they wanted to take. And the plant manager wrote a letter saying that we've never had any problem with him, and we need him for this factory to continue successfully. And they agreed, and he stayed alive. So that was a problematic time. And then, then came the Hungarian Revolution. But up to between the World War and the Hungarian Revolution, there wasn't much of a problem, except you didn't want to advertise you were Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. So, do you have any plans of coming to Nepal anytime soon?
Yes, definitely. We're looking almost every day at tickets. Ticket prices have gone up, and I don't have a project now that pays for it. So, but we plan to come ideally before the main tourist season starts. So hopefully February. We're trying, anyways. February, maybe early March. We'll see. I'll let you know.
Yeah, sure. I think we should catch up for some Marfa, the good old Marfa sometime.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Even it was lovely.
Where did you perfect?
Where?
Sorry, just where did you perfect your English?
Well, I don't think that I've perfected English by any stretch of the imagination. But there are a few English speakers that I can look up to. One of them would obviously be Christopher Hitchens. There would also be Alan Watts, the great philosopher, who brought concepts of Zen Buddhism and religions of the Far East into mainstream Western media, and he's written extensively about it, and his lectures are beautiful. And I wish I could talk as beautifully as Alan Watts or Christopher Hitchens. I always grew up watching a lot of football, English Premier League and everything. And so there was Peter Drury, another of the great commentators. There's Martin Tyler I could look up to. So since I was always surrounded by people who could talk so beautifully, I thought it would be a pity if I didn't try, if not be as good as them, but try to be as good as them. So I wouldn't say I've perfected it. There's a long way to go. But
you studied in a British school. You must have.
No,
British
sir.
school.
No, sir.
No?
I studied Tribhuvan Vishwavidyalaya. The same as you.
Yeah. Because your accent, I would say, was slightly British.
Yes.
Like rather than American English, or
Yes, I mean, ever since watching football, and most of the best football commentary is done in the British accent rather than the American accent. I think that would have had a bit of influence.
Yes.
And I also followed cricket quite a lot, English cricket a lot.
Yes,
so I think, and I followed a lot of British musicians such as Ben Howard or Ed Sheeran, Arctic Monkeys, band of that sort. So I was always drawn into British literature and music and commentary, or the way of living as well. And so whenever I go to restaurants, I order English tea instead of Nepali tea. So yeah, some of the influences I would say are British.
Good. Well, I look forward to getting together for sure.
Yeah, sure. It'll be wonderful to host you for dinner, or the good old Marfa, or Nepali chia, or whatever it may be.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, and it was so wonderful talking to you.
You're very welcome. Okay. Same.
See you.
Cheers.
Cheers.